Welcome to Small Talk Daily for Tuesday, June 1st, 2010. This morning we're going to continue on with the UIPainter and learn about how to hook up a user interface to a domain model. We went over the basics of how the UIPainter works in the previous screencast. I'll provide a link back to that in case you want to follow along. What I've done is I've created a basic user interface. I've got a person with a name and a phone number, and I've got a question mark button here just so that I can press this and get an inspector up. That's really the only part of this interface that works in the way I'm going to talk about this morning. What I want to do is take this person UI and hook it back up to this person object. Now, if you recall from when you generated code back from our UI when I went through the example the other day, it generates code that kind of is all self-sufficient within the UI. So here I have, if I go to the source code here, I have for phone, it just answers the phone variable. For name, it does the same. And then down here in the UI, you can see that it sets up what's called a value model. What I'd like is I'd like those two things to be hooked up. So to get started, what I did is I went to the person, the domain object, and every time you change the name, I send this self-changed. And I do the same for phone. Now you might wonder why I'm doing that. Well, that's so that the domain model will signal to the UI that something about it has changed so that the UI can deal with that. So to get started, I'm going to come to the UI and I'm going to add an instance variable. I'm going to add something called a model. So I'll hit Control S to accept that. I am going to generate accessors for the instance variables, and I need to do that for model. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new method in initialize release. I'm going to add an initialize method here because I need to specify the initial value of the model. So I'm going to do a super initialize here, and then I'm going to say model gets person, assuming I could spell it, new as value. Now, as value just sets up a value model on that underlying domain object, and the purpose behind that is that at runtime I might have a form embedded, say, in some kind of paging thing, and I might want to swap that underlying model and have the new values swapped into the form for me. So by setting up a value model, I allow myself to swap that out in and out dynamically at runtime. So that's really all that's going on there. Now with that, I now have to go through and fix the aspects up. So you might wonder, well, what does that mean? Well, here I've just got these things kind of self-contained within the UI. What I want is I want that instead of being self-contained within the UI, I want this to be hooked up to that underlying domain object. So I'm going to copy in some code here, which is not going to be well formatted, but I'll tab this over so that you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up something called an aspect adapter. It's hooking up to the domain object, self-model. The model is sending updates, that's that changed method I mentioned, and then it's for this aspect. So you notice that I'm hooking up specifically to the name piece of the underlying model. So I'm telling this thing, hook me up to this guy and pay attention to updates to this guy. So with that working, all we have to do is go to phone and pretty much put in the exact same things. We're going to come in here and we're going to paste in exactly the same thing, format this over, push that over as well, and then we're going to add the parenthesis I almost forgot and change this from name to phone, but otherwise everything's going to look the same. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this and open it again. So we'll go ahead and do it, and you'll see that it's going to look awfully much the same. I'm going to put in Fred Flintstone, and I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 6, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll hit this. And the only difference you're going to notice is that if I go to this model object, it's a value holder on a person, and if I double click through on this, it goes to the value, and if I go here, you can see that the things flowed down to the model. So those values are not just captured in the UI, they flowed down to the model. So I was able to hook up my UI to my model, and this is really the way you want to do it. Now, this is for field level updating. What if you wanted form level updating? You know, you wanted to have a button down here that when you pushed it, all those values got maybe validated and then, assuming they were valid, pushed down to the model so that instead of every tab out of a field, they only got processed at the end of processing the form. Well, I'll go through how that works tomorrow. I think we pretty much covered enough for today. So until next time, have fun with small talk.